I've been thinking, what kind of Halloween video topic could I tackle this year that would be guaranteed to strike fear into the hearts of crafters everywhere? Pumpkins are just tasty. For some reason, we've decided that ghosts and skeletons are cute now, and among the main demographic that's watching this video right now, probably about 70% of you, at a minimum, already self-identify as a witch. So what's left? What really, and I mean really, scares us? Every crafter's greatest fear. It's doing something we've never done before and have no confidence in and will probably be terrible at, but sharing it with the internet anyway. Yes, I have decided to take this opportunity to try my hand, no pun intended, at a spot of Halloween hand embroidery. Not something I've done before, but something I've long watched from afar and wished I was artistically talented enough to do myself. So, in the spirit of the season, I've chosen this spooky little cabin pattern, and let's see how that goes, while maybe at the same time having a bit of a word with ourselves about why this is so scary. P.S. Before we dig into all that, hello to the new subscribers over on PeerTube. You don't need me to tell you you're cool, you already know it. But you're cool. Starting from absolute scratch in a new craft is a little bit intimidating, but I figured I was in good hands with the internet. Dr. Christie has a great series for beginner embroiderers that I did watch at the time, but I didn't actually follow along with, so I've got that to refer back to if needed. And the pattern actually comes with video tutorials as well as the written instructions. Shout out for this pattern, by the way. It's just called Spooky Cabin, and it's from an Etsy shop called Magnus & Quill. They actually have all kinds of seasonal variations on this cabin, so you never know, I might end up doing those as well. Link to this will be down in the description, as per. But anyway, there was still some stuff I didn't know. What kind of needles do I need to do this? Do I need a special kind of fabric? Is there anything else I need to find out or buy ahead of time? It can seem overwhelming to have all of these questions, but honestly, I just wrote down everything I was unsure of and then looked them up one at a time over the course of about a week. It turns out embroidery needles are their own separate thing. They're sharp, but generally bigger than cross-stitch needles and with a nice long eye. It also turned out I just had this pack of them randomly lying around. Who knows where packs of needles come from? Anyway, I read that tapestry needles are handy to have as well for something called whipped stitches, and as a knitter and a crocheter, I have plenty of those around the house. One thing that always confuses me is that embroidery tutorials tend to start with the pattern already transferred to the fabric. So I was imagining you might need some kind of special transfer paper and some mad skills to get that far, but once again the pattern came to the rescue with a reminder that actually I could just print the pattern out, hold it up to the window and trace. Low tech, simple, and doesn't involve buying anything. I am in. I have been watching talented embroiderers for years, and every single time I think about trying it myself, I run into all of these little bits that I don't know how to do, that all add up into one major blocker. But actually writing out that list and tackling things one at a time made them no big deal whatsoever, and now that whole anxiety is just gone. It is no secret that I'm a big fan of making lists, but once again, proof that it totally works. So why are we so terrified to try new things like this? Obviously, I can't speak for you, but I can speak for myself, and I suspect there may be a little bit of overlap there. In no particular order then, I worry that. Because I've never done the thing before, I don't know what to expect. And we've talked about this before, but uncertain situations are something I really, really struggle with. Failing will waste time, materials, and money, none of which are infinite, so wasting them feels really, really bad. This is my big thing with sewing, because sewing projects can get really expensive, and ruining some irreplaceable or expensive fabric absolutely just terrifies me. Failing while sharing the process with people also means there's an added chance of public humiliation. And outside of some very specific kinks, nobody wants that. Other people doing the thing are already really good. Maybe I'll never catch up to them, so it feels wrong to count myself as, say, a hand embroidery doer until I'm as good as those people. And finally, I learn things because I want to learn them. Learning those things matters to me, and failing at something that really actually matters to you hurts. A lot. Wow, we really do find the most ridiculous things to worry about, don't we? I'm sure you can spot many flaws and bad assumptions in this list, and honestly as soon as I wrote it down, I could too. But knowing that logically our worries make no sense often doesn't make them go away. The only thing that can make them go away is facing them. So, back to the project. There is quite literally only one way to get past never having done something before, and I don't need to tell you what it is. But once again, the pattern stepped up and made things a lot easier. It encourages you to read through the instructions before starting and also to watch the videos, but it even tells you what to do in the event that the written and visual instructions disagree. So 10 minutes of looking everything over and I knew what to expect. Worry number 1, trampled mercilessly and no longer a concern. Fabulous. I started in with the satin stitch of the cabin and immediately ran into issues. Firstly, it was super hard to pull through the fabric. Seriously, my fingers were so sore after just a couple of stitches, but I figured out why that was later, so we'll leave it for now. Then I realised my stitches were too far apart. For whatever reason, I didn't think to just do more stitches in between and instead attempted to frog, at which point I got into a terrible tangle. This is the sort of thing that normally gets edited out of videos like this, but we are facing our fears and embracing the reality of learning new stuff. So now we were back to dealing with this issue. I tried a smaller needle. That made it worse. Maybe I need a bigger needle, but I don't have one, so I was kind of starting to think this whole project might be a false start. Thankfully though, I did come up with an easier way by sort of waggling the needle to make the hole in the fabric bigger before pulling it through. I did get the hang of it in the end. My cabin is not the neatest satin stitch in the world, but I'm proud of myself for persevering. And I don't know if you can see how red my fingers were after all that, but oh. Wasting materials is always high on my anxiety list because frankly, I just can't afford many materials. If I buy all the stuff for a craft project, that's probably it. That might be my craft budget for the entire month, and I just need to make it work. So one thing I've found very effective for reducing this fear is to reuse or thrift materials where possible. If you recall, earlier this year I completely failed to make my own wedding dress, but what I did manage to do was make a lot of mock-up bodices out of very slightly off-white cotton bedsheet, so I reused that. The advice in the pattern was to use 2 pieces, I guess to make it less see-through and get that typical neat embroidery look, so I got both of these pieces out of one half of one test bodice, and now I have a ton of other embroidery cotton for any future projects. You'll have to forgive the pyjamas and the general untidy appearance in these clips by the way, but I was extremely allergy while filming this, and looking nice was the least of my worries. Halloween! The floss I'm using is all stuff I already owned, some of it is the called for colours and some is just whatever seemed close enough. Crucially though, some of it is not DMC, it's just random cheap Amazon floss, and that includes the brown I was using on that cabin. So it turns out this was basically why it was so hard to pull through. I don't know if it's just that the off-brand is less smooth or if it's maybe very slightly thicker, but I'm happy to report that when I moved on to the actual DMC colours, my life did get a lot easier. Thank the crafting gods. Didn't need to buy a single new supply? That's the kind of project I'm okay with potentially ruining. The majority of the boring satin stitch got done while watching TV with Dave, and now it was time to tackle the tree, which honestly I was really looking forward to. I picked this pattern in part because it has multiple different stitches, and this tree involves something called whipped back stitch as well as these little puff stitches for the leaves. First problem, this colour I've picked is way too dark. Take 2! Most cross stitches already know how to do a basic back stitch, so this part was really easy. And from there, like most things, it was just a case of following the instructions. What a cool little stitch. This is the sort of 3D thing I was really looking forward to, and it was so easy, which was a nice break after all that satin stitch. This part was so satisfying, I can't even tell you. For the leaves, I was supposed to be using 12 strands of floss, but luckily the pattern came with instructions for how to do that, otherwise I would definitely have tried to thread all 12 through the needle and got myself into all kinds of bother. The trick with these stitches is not to pull them too tight, to leave them puffed up a bit like so. And for about the first 30 seconds I was thinking, this is easy, I got this, maybe I am a natural after all. So obviously I'd made a stupid mistake on the back and I had a knot and I had to pull it all out again. Obviously. The problem there is that my floss was tied into a loop, so you can't just easily take these stitches out. I had to cut the floss, frog the stitch, rethread everything, retie the floss, which I apparently did off screen, but I was soon back in the saddle and quickly got the hang of using my needle on the top side and pulling against it from the bottom to get these nice sharp leaf shapes. In hindsight, I probably should have used a darker shade for the leaves, but I was having so much fun I didn't even notice until way later. If anybody knows of an embroidery pattern that's mostly puff stitches and whipped back stitch, do let me know, I'm totally in. Next up was filling in the step of the cabin with more satin stitch, and I was so confident. I've got satin stitch down now. I sort of waggle my needle under the stitch to help it lay flat and... wait a minute. That step is so off-center, what the hell? At first I thought it was me, I'd just drawn it in wrong, you know? But then I realised, oh no, I've somehow given my cabin 5 logs on the left of the door, but only 4 on the right. And this is where the fear of public humiliation really started to spike. I had spent so long on this. My fingers were absolutely trashed, possibly never to recover, and even after all that, after genuinely trying my best, I'd still done it so very, very wrong. Well, luckily before I could spiral too far, I realised it's actually this way on the pattern as well. It's totally not my fault, and I was able to just take a breath and make a plan to redo the step slightly more centred and just call it rustic. This probably isn't even a mistake in the pattern, it's probably intentional, but I freaked out for a minute there. Which is ridiculous! I'm really glad I was able to have a word with myself and calm down enough to take another look at that pattern. I told myself mistakes were expected and unavoidable as a beginner, and anyone judging me for them would be the one with the problem. And you know, the surprising part is, for once I actually listened to myself instead of just editing around the problem part and hoping nobody noticed. Fear of humiliation not entirely conquered, but I think we can call that good progress. Up next was tackling the roof of the cabin, and the idea here is to do long single stitches up either side. But in the demo video, the designer is definitely using some kind of clamp or stand so she can use both hands for this, and I have no such thing. So I knew it might be a bit hard to get the stitches lying flat, but it otherwise looked simple enough. Oh, past me, you sweet summer child. As soon as I put this first stitch in, well, you can see the issue. My fumbling first attempts at satin stitch didn't look like they'd left such a huge gap, but reality begs to disagree. This was kind of demotivating, I won't lie. This section looked so incredibly easy in the example, and it brings everything together so well. Getting it wrong just felt like all the confidence I'd built up so far crumbled to dust. I ended up having to make the roof way thicker than the original design, and I also had trouble getting these long stitches to lie properly flat. Time for another break. And this time I asked myself, what would I say to somebody else in this situation? Well, I'm kind of harsh sometimes, so I would probably say something like, "It's an extra millimetre of roof thickness, get over yourself, woman. You're doing amazingly for a first attempt, and anyone who tells you otherwise can bog off." So what if the actual expert designer demonstrated it perfectly? You don't even know how many takes it did to get that shot. Maybe they've been embroidering for 70 years, you can't expect yourself to get the same results. Have a nice hot drink and get back on it. So, I did. And I even had to budge the bottom right corner of the roof, which I'm not sure if you can see it on this black floss, but I just decided it looks like an old cabin that someone's had to wedge a bit of extra wood into to fill a gap. YOLO. And from this point on, I was fired up. Chimney is a bit wonky first time, just do it again. Chimney is wonky the second time too. Screw it, cabin chimneys can be wonky if they want. I attempted to even up the windows by means of carefully placed outlines, but if I'm honest, it only worked a bit. Still, even the example one isn't perfect, so this is absolutely good enough for me. Yes, the fence lines are supposed to be straight, but yes, also it's a hand embroidery piece and nobody expects it to actually be geometrically perfect. You'll notice I was also completely unable to visualise how much room the tops of the fence posts were going to take up, and I ended up with lots of visible pen marks. We may end this video with the ultimate fail if I can't get them to fully disappear, but I just tried to put that out of my mind and hope for the best. A couple of the fence posts did end up a bit looser than I'd like, and that's okay, but also, with everything I've learned, I think I can fix that. So, given that they don't overlap with anything else, I figured I could just leave that to the end and fix it before the big reveal. This is always a big turning point with a new craft, when you start to feel all casual and no big deal about fixing mistakes. It felt great. The smoke ghost is made up of more of those puff stitches, like the leaves on the tree, and that all seemed to be going well. Which, of course it would, I'm near the end of this project, I've got to be an expert by now, right? Ah, I've tied my new round of floss onto the tapestry needle instead of the embroidery needle. Well done me. Still, it all worked out in the end, and now all he needed was some eyes, which, again, kind of terrifying. I am always bad at eyes. Getting the placement even very slightly off can dramatically change the expression, and because of the way these puff stitches work, if this went wrong, taking them out again would be an absolute nightmare. It was one and done, and I was sweating. look how long it took me just to get the first eye to lie how I wanted it. But sometimes you've just got to take the time and do the thing right. Thankfully, the second eye went in a lot easier and we had ourselves a smoky little ghost friend. Which was perfect timing because that's exactly the moment my camera battery ran out. Most of what was left at this point was satin stitch, and frankly you've seen enough of me doing satin stitch, so I just finished the rest off while we watched TV that night. Okay then, without further ado. The moon went amazingly well for like half of it until it started to wobble a little bit towards the bottom. The bats were by far the most awkward bit of satin stitching, and they've turned out as two completely different shapes somehow. I don't know how that happened. These mossy bits around the gravestones are just basic French knots, which I have done a million times before, so you'd think that would be simple. But let me tell you, it's a whole different ballgame when you're trying to do them in and around satin stitch and you're using 6 strands. So that's it, that's my first attempt at hand embroidery. How would you rate it? I would rate it an ow, that knacks out of 10. Some intentional deviations from the pattern. Some intentional mistakes that I'll hopefully make a few less of next time. And yeah, some very minor wrinkling of the fabric because my hoop is a bit crappy and I'm bad at compensating for it. But a cute smoke ghost. A perfectly acceptable crescent shape first time on that moon. And of course that tree. I am so in love with that tree. What was the last fear on our list there? Ah yes, the uncomfortable truth that learning hand embroidery, despite being a largely pointless pursuit in the grand scheme of things, was actually really important to me. I see all these amazing projects and I'm just really sick of feeling jealous of other people's skills. So every time I got into trouble with this project, every time I got into yet another tangle or I realised the stitch was a fraction of a millimetre out and therefore looked completely wrong somehow and I would have to do it again, yeah, it stung. It really hurt. But I kept going anyway, and while I need a lot of practice and there is a lot of room for improvement, I'm really proud of myself for sticking through it. Whatever your crafting white whale may be, I hope seeing me face this one down with relative success inspires you to give yours a go too. Thank you as always for my supporters over on Ko-fi for enabling this video. And especially to the Stitch Squad, who this week are Stitching Liz, Mary Ann Johnson, Sunny, Candy Riley Pettinger, Laura Salets, Rosalie, Enlightened Flamingo, Cross Stitch the Globe, and our newest member, Shay Condon. I'll be back soon with some more crafty nonsense, so in the meantime, have a brilliant rest of your day and keep making spooky stuff!